Dr. Madrona is an associate professor of family medicine and psychiatry at the University of Saskatchewan in Canada, and he is the author of Coyote Medicine, Coyote Healing, Coyote Wisdom, and Narrative Medicine. He has a new book that will be coming out sometime next year called Narrative Psychiatry, and he recently started the Coyote Institute, which is something he's going to give you a little bit more detail about. And the title of his presentation today is Traditional Stories of Native Americans in Emotional Healing. Won't you please welcome Dr. Louis Mehl-Madrona.
Thank you. Is the mic on? Can you hear me? No? All right. It's hanging down. Well, that's why it's not on. It fell off. Yeah. How's that? Can you hear me yet? How's that? Can you hear me in the back of the room? Perfect? Wow, that's good. I thought we'd start with some images, just for fun, and also because I thought they would serve an indigenous style introduction, because I wanted to give you some flavor of indigeneity, of how indigenous people would introduce themselves. And also I wanted to give you a little bit of historical background, so you'll understand the context of what we're talking about. So, so typically we start with where we were born. So I was born in Mount Vernon, Kentucky. Anybody been there? How about that? A few people have been there. Actually, I was born in Berea, Kentucky, but we lived in Mount Vernon. And that's where it is. That's where my mother's people come from. So we start usually with our mother's people. And if you're ever on the reserve, the first question is, so who's your mom and who's she related to? And recently I wrote a little post on my blog about why Oedipus could never happen in North America. Because everybody knows who's related to who, and it takes a half an hour usually to do introductions so people can figure it out. But nobody would get away with not figuring out who their mother was. So anyway, this is the lake around where I grew up, Cumberland Lake. And Cumberland River, this is where we went fishing. And we got some nice rapids for the tourists. Yeah. And this is a better little shot of the river. This is how we used to fish. I thought you'd enjoy this picture. But this is stick fishing. And it was a Cherokee. My mother's people are Cherokee, Tsalagi in the Cherokee language. And this is how we used to fish. And I just wanted to mention the Trail of Tears, because every indigenous group in North America has a Trail of Tears. And it sets the context for what we're going to talk about. In 1836, the Cherokee Nation was rounded up and marched to Oklahoma. Guess what? They didn't want to go. Oklahoma was a lot different from Tennessee and Kentucky and northern Alabama, northern Georgia, which is the homeland of the Cherokee. And it was originally named the Trail of Tears and Death by a Choctaw chief who had done the march in 1831, 5 years before the Cherokee did the march. And so things like that create an atmosphere of hopelessness and despair that continue historically. This is John Ross, who was the chief of the Cherokee Nation during the march. And just for interest, I thought I'd point out that the whole notion of blood quantum, of what percent Indian you are, was invented by the U.S. Congress in 1904. It's not a traditional thing. John Ross was actually, by blood quantum, 7/8 non-Cherokee and 1/8 Cherokee. But in those days, you either were or you weren't, and he was, and he became the chief. So I thought you'd like to see one of my favorite Cherokee ceremonies, the Green Corn Dance, which is still performed in Oklahoma. I'm not sure about Cherokee, North Carolina. This is a lacrosse player from my culture. This is how they dress to play lacrosse. I thought you'd enjoy that. And now I'm going to tell you about my father's people, who are Oglala. My father comes from Wounded Knee, South Dakota, and that's where it is. He and my mom met compliments of the U.S. Air Force. They used to pay local women to dance with airmen. Does anyone remember that? You don't have to raise your hand because that'll date you. They don't do that anymore. Probably because what happened was sometimes they did more than dance. Hello! So I have to thank the U.S. Air Force for my appearance here, for my existence, but it's okay, I gave them 4 years of my life, so I paid them back. So anyway, this is the church in the town where my father grew up. These are fields outside of the town, and these are the critters that used to cover the prairies where my father lived, and still, this is the small herd that lived outside of my father's town. This is just down the road, the Badlands, and Sunset in South Dakota. Can you see why they call it the Black Hills? Yeah. That's why the color for the west in Lakota is black. Because when you look to the west, you see the Black Hills. In Dakota, which is further east of Lakota, the color for the west is dark blue because they can't see the Black Hills. They just see the dark blue sunset. So, and this is my father's town, and I just want to show you some scenes from the massacre at Wounded Knee, which is the Wounded Knee version of the Trail of Tears. And it gives you a sense for why Native people are so angry still, and why there's so much despair. This is the site of the massacre, the memorial. And the people were gathering in 1893 for a ghost dance. And the ghost dance was a revivalist spiritualist movement. It was believed that if enough people danced, that the Creator would come down and lift white people off the face of the earth. It didn't work, but they had put down all their weapons because it was not inappropriate to take a weapon into a spiritual ceremony. This is one of the leaders of the ghost dance, and I love his name, Chief Young Man Afraid of His Horses. That's his name. And these were the leaders who put down their weapons. This was a shot of them disarming, you know. And they all got massacred by the U.S. cavalry. No one had a weapon. They all froze in the bodies froze in the snow. I think it was approximately 300 people killed, men, women, and children. And I just have a few scenes of the dead to show you. This was the traditional healer who was leading the ghost dance. They made a little hospital inside the church after the battle, and my hero, Charles Eastman, was the physician there. But mostly they just put the dead in a ditch and piled them up and put them in a ditch and then covered it up. Just like, I guess, government cover-up is not new. So I wanted to, this is my hero, Charles Eastman. I wanted to show you these slides so that you understand the historical context of Native American people today and what we'll be talking about today. That every group has a story like this.